Hello everyone, I'm Bitches Bruze, 8-year Derby veteran, coach, and referee. You may have heard me broadcast on WFTDA.tv as Amy Jo Moore. Today I'm going to talk about pack definition, or, to get alliterative on y'all, something the rules like to call pack, proximity, and position. I'm going to assume you know what is considered to be the most basic flat track roller derby stuff. You know, the things they call Derby 101. Each team gets 5 skaters on the track. The one with the star is a scoring skater. After the first lap, she gets points for passing opponents. Jams go for 2 minutes. The lead jammer can end the jam before 2 minutes. And blockers stop the opposing jammer and help their own. Alright, that's groovy. If you've been to a bout or done any kind of following of Derby on the web, if you've heard that once, you've probably heard it at least 100 times. Still, so many people struggle with the basics of gameplay because no one ever explains about the pack other than it's the blockers on the track. Flat track roller derby is the strategically challenging creature it is because of how the rules around pack definition affect the game. While scoring in derby is about races between 2 opposing jammers, gameplay is about the constantly changing pack. That bears repeating. Roller derby gameplay is about the constantly changing pack. In order to understand how packs, proximity, and position affect the game, we have to have a perfect understanding of what it means to have a pack. Section 3 of the WFTDA rules, as of January 2015, is dedicated to defining the pack. To paraphrase the definition of pack, it is the largest group of blockers, upright, on the track, from both teams, within 10 feet of each other. Whenever the rules mention the word proximity, it means 10 feet. And when we say 10 feet in relation to the pack, it is measured by the hips of the skaters along the shortest distance parallel to the inside track boundary. Let's take a quick look at what the rules mean about that 10-foot measurement. We cannot simply draw a line between skaters' hips and measurement. The 10 feet is along the line parallel to the inside track boundary. Imagine, if you will, that you were standing inside the track and looking at the skaters as though they were drawn on a piece of paper. It's along that distance you measure. Sometimes it helps to look at extremes. Here we have 2 blockers on the jammer line, one all the way to the outside of the track and the other one all the way to the inside. If we were to measure between their hips alone, they would be about 13.5 feet apart. But along a line parallel to the inside track boundary, they are exactly 0 feet apart. As one blocker moves along a path parallel to the inside track boundary, they'll continue to be more than 10 feet apart physically, but along that parallel path, in this example, they're about 9 feet apart. This applies anywhere on the track. We view that distance perspective in 2D, from the inside of the track. This can be exceptionally confusing, especially on the corners, where the line parallel to the inside isn't actually drawn, but has to be imagined tangentially to the inside corner. Let's review that pack definition again. It's the largest group of blockers, upright, on the track, from both teams, within 10 feet of each other. Of course, sometimes a definition alone isn't enough to get our heads around a concept. To further clarify what the pack is, let's also talk about what and who is not the pack. If the largest group is the pack, that means groups that are smaller than the largest group are not a pack. Also, same-sized groups cannot be the largest group. Superlatives count. It must be the largest and only the largest, not tied for largest. If the pack is made up of blockers, that means jammers do not count when determining the pack. This can be really confusing when the jammers are mixed in with other blockers, especially since the only thing that visually distinguishes a jammer is their helmet cover. Because you must be upright, skaters who are not upright are not part of the pack. WFTDA's definition of upright is not down, and WFTDA's definition of down includes skaters who have fallen or been knocked to the ground. Think of this as any body part on the ground that is not otherwise mentioned. Have either or both knees on the ground. A single knee pad on the ground means you're not upright. 2 knee pads and you're still not upright. Have both hands on the ground. If you are in the process of standing, stepping, or skating, having one hand on the ground is not down. But if you put both hands on the ground, you are considered down and not upright. After going down or falling, a skater is considered down until the skater is standing, stepping, or skating. So, if in the process of getting up you find yourself on your skates in one hand, you are still down until that hand also comes off the ground. Standing is not considered down, nor is a skater in the process of falling who doesn't have more than their skates and one hand on the ground. Jumping is also not considered down until a landing meets the definition of down. So back to our scenario here, where we have 3 blockers upright from one team and 1 blocker down from the other team. This group would clearly not meet the definition of a pack because it only contains upright blockers from one team, even though there's an opposing team blocker within proximity. The same not the pack status applies to skaters who are not on the track. This group of 3 blockers on the track are not a pack, even though there's an opposing blocker in proximity because that opposing blocker is not on the track. If the opposing blocker returns to the track legally and within proximity, there might be a pack here. My image here shows the obvious blocker physically not on the track. But a blocker can be physically on the track and be considered not on the track. In what circumstance can a blocker be considered not on the track? When they are physically on the track. If you said a blocker who has been assessed a penalty is not on the track, even if they're on the track, you'd be correct. A large group of skaters from only one team cannot be the pack without someone from the other team in proximity. By now you should have a solid understanding of what makes the pack, but let's go over it one more time. It's the largest group of blockers, upright, on the track, from both teams, within 10 feet of each other. The pack is an important part of gameplay because it is the cornerstone of defining other things, such as pack speed, pack direction, and the engagement zone. The impacts of pack speed and direction are beyond the scope of this video, but the engagement zone is the very core of this video and the game of derby. 99% of roller derby must happen in the engagement zone. In a moment, I'll go over the definition of the engagement zone, but first, let's quickly look at what can only happen in the engagement zone. Blockers can block other blockers and jammers. Jammers can block blockers. Blockers can assist blockers and jammers. Jammers can assist blockers and take assists off of blockers. The jammer helmet cover may be passed. The next jammer pass begins on exiting. Blockers must remain in it or immediately return to it, and blockers outside the zone are scored on in some instances. In order to find the engagement zone, we have to find the pack. The largest group of blockers with members from both teams upright within 10 feet of each other. The engagement zone extends from 20 feet or 6 meters behind the rearmost pack skater to 20 feet or 6 meters in front of the foremost pack skater. It also exists only between the inside and outside track boundaries. All blockers who are upright and in the engagement zone are in-played and are allowed to play all that fun derby I talked about a moment ago. We've gone over the pieces of the process of determining the pack and finding the engagement zone. Now let's take a look at the process as a whole. When laid out like this, it looks kind of complicated because the shortest path has 2 decisions and the longest path has 5 decisions and 4 processes. Not only that, but in order to follow the game, we repeatedly and constantly cycle through this process. Let's step through each decision and process and put together all our pieces. Let's start with the simplest direction through this process. If, after testing for a pack, we find one, then we move to the process of defining the engagement zone. Once we define the engagement zone, we look to see if there are any skaters outside the engagement zone. If there are none, everyone can engage everyone else. Now let's go back and look at the path if there's no pack. If there's no pack, the first thing that's going to happen is the referees are going to warn no pack. And on that signal, both teams are equally responsible for reforming a pack. Then a determination must be made as to why there was no pack. Was it an illegal destruction or something that happened in the normal course of gameplay? In offensive strategy, teams often want to create a no pack. With no blockers able to engage, a jammer can skate freely without opposition So it's not uncommon for a skater or group of skaters to intentionally act to destroy the pack. Actions which are considered illegal destruction of the pack are a skater or skaters running away more than 10 feet in front of or behind the pack. This includes chasing the jammer, trying to speed the pack quickly, getting out of a trap and racing to join their team, and racing back in an attempt to draw an out-of-bounds skater back or force a cut. A skater or skaters braking or coasting more than 10 feet, which includes intentionally stopping, failing to propel at pack speed, or slowing down as a result of giving an assist, and more. Intentionally taking a knee. Intentionally falling. Intentionally skating out of bounds, or any sudden deviation of speed by a team of skaters. These actions alone are not illegal, but if they are responsible for no pack, then they are illegal. Of course, not all actions which destroy the pack are illegal. If your group of skaters forms the pack and you force the only opponents down or out of bounds, there is no penalty. If you go for a block and in the process of the block you fall or skate out of bounds, there is no penalty. If no skater or team of skaters is clearly responsible for the no pack, then there is no penalty. Yet. If it is determined the pack was destroyed by one or more skaters, then this is called destruction of pack, and the referees will issue this out-of-play penalty to the skater most responsible, up to 1 for each team. Regardless of reason, both teams must be working to reform the pack. If no pack reforms immediately, the referees will issue a failure to reform out-of-play penalty. They will continue to issue these penalties and check for a pack in this loop until there is a pack again. Once there is a pack, we jump back to the yes there is a pack part of our flowchart. At this point, we check to see if there are any blockers outside of the engagement zone. If all the blockers are in the engagement zone, then we're all set, except that we start at the beginning and keep cycling through this process whenever there's an active jam. But if there are blockers outside the engagement zone, then the referees will warn them. This flowchart is only for the process of being out of play. We're not showing here if someone engages or is engaged while out of play, because that will earn a penalty with or without warning. This is why when we follow the path for yes, blockers are out of play, there must be a referee warning. Otherwise, the skaters cannot be penalized for not returning to the engagement zone. Once warned, however, there's a process for skaters returning to the engagement zone. Skaters in front of or behind the pack are treated just a little differently, not just because they have to return to the engagement zone in the opposite with the way they left, but there's another step for skaters who are ahead of the engagement zone. If a skater is out of play behind the engagement zone, they must skate in derby direction until they have reached the engagement zone. If they do so immediately, we move on to reassessing the status of the pack and defining the engagement zone again. If they do not, they're issued a penalty and we return to assessing the pack in the engagement zone. If a skater is ahead of the engagement zone, they must return to the front of the engagement zone. But how they're required to do so is determined by the direction of the pack. If the pack is moving in derby direction, or counterclockwise, skaters ahead of the engagement zone must slow to the point of stopping in order to rejoin the engagement zone. If the pack is stopped, or moving clockwise, then skaters ahead of the engagement zone must actively skate clockwise to return to the engagement zone. As with skaters behind the engagement zone, there is the return immediately test and the possibility of a penalty if returning or attempting to return did not happen immediately. Now that we know how to define the pack, the engagement zone, and what the blockers are required to do to keep a pack and stay in the engagement zone, let's look at some snapshots of common pack arrangements. We'll practice with a virtual whiteboard in these scenarios and continually ask what-if questions. For all of these scenarios, as soon as they come up on the screen, ask yourself, where is the pack? Which blockers are in play, but not in the pack? Which blockers are out of play, or not on the track? Which jammers are in the engagement zone? This one should be easy. Where's the pack? All of the blockers are part of the pack. None of the blockers are outside of the pack. None of these blockers are out of play or not on the track. The blue jammer is in the engagement zone behind the pack, and the yellow jammer is just ahead of the engagement zone. Note that even though the blue jammer is within 10 feet of the rearmost blocker, they are not part of the pack. The pack is comprised of these 2 blue and 3 yellow blockers. That also means that the engagement zone is about here. The 2 pivots are still in play in the forward part of the engagement zone. This blue blocker is out of bounds, so they are not on the track or in play. The blue jammer is still behind the pack in the engagement zone, and the yellow jammer is ahead of the engagement zone. We're getting a little trickier now, but I bet you get this one. The pack is comprised of the blue pivot and this 1 yellow blocker. The blue jammer cannot be part of the pack, so that leaves the remaining blue blocker more than 10 feet behind the next closest blocker. The other yellow blocker is more than 10 feet ahead of the next closest blocker. Here's the engagement zone. This yellow blocker is in play ahead of the pack, and this blue blocker is in play behind the pack. All of the blockers in the penalty box are not on the track. Again, our blue jammer is in the engagement zone, and the yellow jammer is not. Here's a pretty common scenario, especially after a scrum start, where yellow takes the back wall and blue takes the front. If the yellow jammer is able to push the blue blockers faster than the blue jammer can push the yellow blockers, the blockers start to pull apart in terms of pack, but cluster in terms of team. There is no pack, because there is more than 10 feet between the 2 closest opposing skaters. None of them. If there's no pack, there's no engagement zone, and no blockers can be in play. All of them are out of play. While there is no engagement zone here, the jammers are considered to have completed their pass when they passed the foremost blocker. Second verse, same as the first. This situation often arises as blockers in the last scenario work to reform the pack or play some offensive blocking for their own jammer. We still have no pack. While all of the blockers are within 10 feet of at least one opponent, we have 2 equal groups of skaters from both teams, and the 2 groups are more than 10 feet apart. No blockers are in play because there is no pack and no engagement zone. All of the blockers are out of play. Again, there is no engagement zone. A jammer who passes the foremost blocker in this scenario will have completed their pass. A common solution for creating a pack here is for one of the solitary blockers, for example, the single blue blocker among the yellow blockers, to intentionally take a knee. This can work well if the 2 packs were pretty far apart to begin with, but in this scenario the 3 yellow blockers would still be eligible to engage because the pack is now here. The engagement zone is now here. And if that pack moves forward quickly, in order to stay in front of the blue jammer, the yellow blockers just have to skate forward too. But if those blockers become out of play too when the blue blocker takes a knee, perhaps the blue jammer could get a bit of a break baiting the out-of-play blockers to engage, or sprinting forward while they adjust to an out-of-play warning. This is a great still for considering some what-if scenarios. The pack is clustered here, with these 3 blue and 1 yellow blocker. And here's about where the engagement zone is. That means these 2 yellow blockers are in play and eligible to engage the blue jammer. Both this out-of-bounds blue blocker and this yellow pivot are out of play. Think about this one a bit, though. Assuming the out-of-bounds blue blocker was knocked out by the yellow pivot, where must the blue blocker come into the track? Since the yellow pivot is out of play, the blue blocker may come in behind the other yellow blockers. Where is the pack if the blue blocker returns to the track as soon as legally possible behind the last in-play yellow blocker? There is no pack. Is this to the advantage of the blue blocker? Probably not. While remaining out of bounds, blue's jammer is only confronted by 2 opponents, one of which is nearly out of play, while yellow's jammer is confronted by 3 opponents and 1 offensive blocker. Making a no pack at this point would likely release the yellow jammer, while the yellow blockers and pivot to the rear would race up behind the blue wall to legally reform the pack and make passing that much harder on the blue jammer. Is the blue blocker required to return to play? Nope, not in this scenario. Not unless the blue blocker's return to play would make a pack when there was none. May the blue blocker return to play even if it would destroy the pack? Yes, that's considered normal gameplay. The yellow jammer is in the engagement zone and the blue jammer is behind it. Here's another fairly common scenario. Yellow is on a power jam, and the blockers are playing a passive offense. This means they've managed to slow the pack down to stopping or nearly stopped, while the blue blockers have to hold the yellow jammer without breaking the pack. All of the blockers on the track are in the pack. None of the blockers are in play but not in the pack. There is 1 blue blocker in the penalty box, but they appear to be standing. The yellow jammer is in the engagement zone. The blue jammer is in the penalty box. Maybe you saw this coming when I put up the slide, and maybe you didn't. We would call what yellow is doing bridging back. Why would yellow want to bridge back? Besides making the pack proximity very weak by having only 1 blocker within 10 feet of the opponents, they're also making the returning blocker have to skate clockwise out of the penalty box or be faced with a nearly full lap around to return to the track. Watch what this bridge can do when the blue blocker returns from the box in the next scenario. So here's a brilliant play by the yellow blockers who, in our last scenario, had bridged back to force the blue blocker returning from the penalty box to come in behind the rearmost in-play blocker. As soon as the blue blocker entered the track, the yellow blockers, including the pivot, skated clockwise to form a tight pack around that blue blocker, making them the GOAT. And yes, this is legal. At no time did the game ever stop having a pack, so no one is in trouble for destroying the pack. But the blue blockers in front are in danger, and we'll get to that in a moment. The pack is now in the back with this tightly clustered group of 4 yellow blockers and 1 blue blocker. Let's draw in the engagement zone. All the blockers that are in play are also part of the pack. That group of 3 blockers in front of the yellow jammer are all out of play. And they are so far out of play that an aware yellow jammer should be able to get past any who remain in front, even while one hurries back to bridge. There are no jammers in the engagement zone. When the yellow blockers skated back and reformed the pack significantly farther back with their bridge, they moved the engagement zone behind the yellow jammer. If we assume that the yellow jammer didn't pass the blue blocker in this pass before the blue blocker returned from the box, then this jammer has completed a scoring pass without actually passing anyone. So how many points does the yellow jammer get in this pass? The answer is 5. First, because of Rule 7.2.5, the yellow jammer scores a point for every blocker who has advanced ahead of the engagement zone and not yet returned. Once the jammer scores on those 3, they immediately earn 1 point for the jammer in the penalty box and 1 point for the blue blocker who returned from the penalty box behind the jammer. However, if the jam had ended like this, with the blue blockers up front having never left the engagement zone, and the blue blocker in the rear of the pack returned to the track behind the yellow jammer, and the yellow jammer never actually passes any of their opposing blockers in the front of the engagement zone, the jammer gets 0 points. This is really a pointer for scoring strategies, but it's important to highlight the power of being in play or out of play for those 3 forward blue blockers. Out of play, they give up 5 points. In play, they keep the jammer scoreless. Here's another fairly common pack scenario that involves bridging. The pack includes the 6 blockers, including and between the blue pivot in the front and the rearmost yellow blocker. The pivot and the blue blocker in the pack are bridging forward to keep those front 2 blockers in play. All of the yellow blockers are bridging backward. Their purpose for bridging backward is twofold. First, they're making the pack as weak as possible in the middle, so the rearmost blue blocker can't go any farther forward without breaking the whole thing. Second, they're bridging back so the blue jammer has to skate farther coming out of the box. Let's look at what their engagement zone is. Before we move on to who is in play, let's look at how this engagement zone affects the jammer returning from the penalty box. They can exit the penalty box clockwise and come in behind the rearmost yellow blocker. My pack definition in this picture isn't very good, but it has to be behind in relation to that inside line. So the closest they can enter is about here. But that rearmost blocker can leave the pack and skate farther back. In which case that jammer now has to skate to here. Blockers can play tricks such as look like they are in a position on the track and the moment before the opponent re-enters the track either stick their hips back or jump or skate back. This is a scenario where it would be easy to forget that in the previous image, that yellow blocker was allowed to go farther back. One way to avoid having to play cat and mouse with a rear blocker like that is to enter the track and skate counterclockwise. But to do that, you must enter in front of the engagement zone. It's not good enough to just enter in front of the foremost blockers. These 2 front blockers and that rearmost yellow blocker. But in our original scenario, that rearmost yellow blocker was in the pack. There are no out of play or not on the track blockers. The yellow jammer is in the engagement zone. The blue jammer can return in the engagement zone behind the rearmost yellow blocker or ahead of the engagement zone. We've figured out what a pack is and isn't. We've learned how to use the pack to find the engagement zone. We've looked at a few scenarios to evaluate these rules in the context of strategy. Let's take a moment to pack up all of these parts and pull together our understanding of the core of the game of flat track derby. In order to find the engagement zone, we have to find the pack, the largest group of blockers with members from both teams upright and within 10 feet of each other. The engagement zone extends from 20 feet behind the rearmost pack skater to 20 feet in front of the foremost pack skater, between the inside and outside track boundaries. All blockers who are upright and in the engagement zone are in play. This is critical because nearly everything in derby must happen in the engagement zone. We need it because in the engagement zone, blockers can block other blockers and jammers. Jammers can block blockers. Blockers can assist blockers. Jammers can assist blockers. The jammer helmet cover may be passed. And the next jammer pass begins on exiting. Blockers remain in or immediately return to it. Blockers outside of the zone are scored on without being actually passed in some instances. Remember, the pack is constantly changing. In this video, I've given you some snapshot scenarios. There are plenty of exercises you can give yourself to improve your ability to observe packs and their effect on gameplay. I usually recommend to my new skaters to begin with photos. Look at photos and ask yourself, which blockers are in the pack? Which blockers are in play? Where is the pack on the track? Can I tell who is lead jammer? In this picture we can see that all 8 blockers are on the track. Neither team has fielded a pivot. We can't tell you who is lead, but we do know that we can see more than half the track and we can't see a jammer or a jam referee. So the jammers are either not on the track or, based on the sight line of the 3 white blockers and 2 of the blue blockers, the jammer is just coming out of corner 4. From the arrangement of blockers, this looks a lot like scenario J, so it's probably white's jammer on a power jam. Or in this picture, we can see a pack. It's made up of all 4 blue blockers and 2 white blockers. There's 1 white blocker back at the apex between turns 3 and 4 bridging. We don't know where the 4th white blocker is or the blue jammer, but we do know where the white jammer is. She might be a little hard to see, but we know that's the white jammer ref on the inside watching because he's looking at the skater behind the blue pivot and blocker, and he's got a white wrap on his left wrist, indicating he's jam reffing for white. We also know she isn't lead because he isn't pointing at her. Ask yourself, why is the white blocker bridging back? Ask yourself if you think the blue jammer is on the track or in the box. Is the other white blocker in the box, or could she possibly be in play just off to the right of the photo? Watch video 2. Try and see what actions make a pack break. Observe what actions restore a pack while still achieving team goals and what actions are counter to team goals. Use whiteboards to draw scenarios and discuss them with a teammate. Attend live derby events with your team. Besides being loads of fun, talking about what's going on with other people can really up your individual game. Work on making and breaking packs at practice. Watch bout video and see how you did compared to practice. But most of all, just play derby. Play derby while people coach where your packs are and when they aren't. Practice like you play in every way. Thank you for watching my video on pack, proximity, and position. If you found this video helpful, please like it on YouTube and share it with your friends. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, be sure to check out my channel and subscribe so you can be the first to know when I release new strategy videos.